Introduce our next keynote speaker. Her name is Grace Beason. She's the Director of Governance and Risk and Compliance with Guidewire Software. She comes to us with a huge background in the industry. She's actually an accomplished security risk and compliance manager with a proven track record of working with the information technology and service industry with an expertise in information security and privacy. Strong operations leader, skilled in security risk and compliance of next generation cloud, IoT, and legacy IT services. She has a broad client base of Fortune 100 customers and international government sectors. Help me in welcoming Grace to the DataConnectors stage. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Am I okay? Okay. All right. So I've got 3 topics that I want to talk to you today. I'm switching tone a little bit. I hear that we've been talking a lot about ransomware and zero trust and all kinds of other things. But today, in this session, we're going to talk about GRC. So GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. Let me start with.
Hey, Grace, you want to grab the wireless? Yeah.
All right, we'll switch it.
There we go.
All right, can you hear me now? You should really hear me now. Okay, I'll hold this down here. So, as I was saying, today I want to talk to you guys about governance, risk, and compliance. So that other stepchild of the IT cyber world that you say, yeah, they're there, and they're going to come knocking on our door at some time. But I'm going to talk to you today about how we're going to partner together, and we're going to help a company to scale and be efficient and have more visibility. So first thing I want to do is I want to understand the audience. So how many people in this room right now are in a C-suite kind of role? All right, we've got some C-suites, great. How many people in a traditional IT, DBAs, engineers, architects, solution architects, that kind of stuff? All right, and how many are in like a risk and compliance kind of role? Oh, we got some great ones. Okay, fantastic. All right, so when I talk about GRC, my thing, so I'm going to tell you a little story actually. Years ago, I was working with a group of folks at one of my previous roles, and we had a massive escalation. And I had a coworker who was a security architect and worked great with him. I worked with him regularly. And so we had this escalation, and we're all brought together into a room in a particular area, and we're working together on a solution. And a couple of days go by, and we're there for a week, and their technical folks are all doing diagrams and network diagrams and how they're going to add all these architectural things, and they're going to add all these different applications and controls. And at some point during the week, he says to me, I really like working with you, and I'm glad you're here, but I don't understand why you're here. Like, usually we work with you after we've done this. We usually solution everything and build it, and then, compliance comes in after. So that's the problem. The problem is you're not partnering with us. And so you're building things and you're solutioning to a problem. And that's great, because that's really what we need to do. But you also need to consider regulations. You need to consider our base core controls that we have established within the organization. And you need to consider what we've committed to our clients for. And if you don't do that, that's okay. You're going to go live with that, and you're going to fix that problem. And then either I or my team are going to come in and we're going to audit you, or we're going to work with our third-party auditors in a few months or in a year, and we're going to test the controls that we're supposed to be compliant with, and you're not going to have a solution to all of those. And it's not like you're going to be able to say to me, geez, we didn't contract for that, we didn't cost for that, so we're not going to be able to do it. If it's a regulatory control, if it's one of the baselines that our executive leadership and we have decided has to be the minimum standard of what we're going to deliver to our customers, and we've probably written that into the contracts, by the way, or if it's a customer control that we have agreed to by contract, we have to comply with that. So you can solution all you want, but we're going to come in and we're going to tell you how to do it. And then my C-suite folks, you're going to get upset because I'm going to hit your bottom line. And I'm going to make you do something that you didn't cost for, and ultimately, you're going to have to cost for. So today I want to talk to you about how we're going to partner together on that. Because I don't want to cost your bottom line. I really don't. And my team doesn't want to. And we don't want to be a problem. We don't want to be that, the Staples thing that was the the answer button that was always no. We don't always want to say no. We want to work with you together to say, how do we solution this together so that we meet our needs from whatever requirements we have, but we meet yours from a business perspective as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. From the C folks, what I'm going to talk to you about is I want you to partner with your GRC folks, and I want you to have transparency into your risks. I want you to have transparency into your compliance structure. I want you to find ways that you're going to partner together, and we're going to create efficiency through financial efficiency, operational efficiency. And ultimately, we're going to reduce or we're going to optimize risk. My IT and engineering folks, audit fatigue, right? How many times a year are you approached by compliance people or GRC people saying, I need you to pull this report, the auditors are coming in, or I need you to sit in the meeting. I'm not going to reduce all those meetings, sorry, but I am going to help you to talk about ways that we can partner together, and we're going to reduce the amount of times I have to come to you and say, can you get me that report? Can you pull me that screenshot? Can you get me this other artifact? Because I need to know. And my risk folks, my compliance and risk folks, I'm going to talk to you about a way that you're going to mature your program and you're going to be able to scale. And I've used this process both in a very, very large Fortune 50 company with 170,000 staff, 500,000 servers across, 70 or so countries. And I'm using it now in a small company with about 3,000 or 4,000 staff and smaller footprint of customers and staff. Because what we're doing here is creating efficiency. It doesn't matter the size of the company. Lost my remote. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk to you about is when we say GRC, we don't say G or R or C. So if you're in one of those companies that has segregated this out, or worse, duplicated it, so that you have a governance team maybe in a PMO office, and you've got a risk team in some other team, and I'm not saying that ERM can't be in one office, but you can't have 4 or 5 different risk teams. You can't have it by product. You can't have it by division. You've got to integrate it. If you have your compliance folks over in a corner or they're working siloed, you're not going to be able to scale. And you're not going to create efficiency, because what's going to happen is people in each group, they're going to be stepping over each other's toes, and they're going to be duplicating efforts. So the first thing I want to talk about is if you don't have G and R and C together, my picture is it's like a 3-legged stool. And if you have one group off on another doing its own thing, it's going to break and it's going to fail. When you bring them together, you're going to reduce fragmentation. You're going to have company-wide and enterprise-wide visibility. You're going to be able to have an applied risk approach, and you're going to have life cycle compliance and risk. First, next thing I want to do, before we even dive into that more, I want to talk to you about a couple of terms that I hear consistently overlapping. So these are my terms, and I say, let's clear the air. Risk assessments, risk acceptance, risk exception, no such thing. Risk exemption, no such thing, and extensions. So let's talk a little bit about the terminology. Let's start with an exception. There is no such thing as a risk exception. You either have the risk or you don't. You can't have an exception to a risk. You have an exception to a policy or standard, not to a risk. Risk acceptance. Okay, have you done a risk acceptance assessment first? We're going to talk about that a little bit later. If you haven't done a risk assessment before every single risk acceptance, you've got de facto risk, and you have no idea if you've accepted risk within your tolerance, within your appetite, within your threshold. You don't know. Somebody has stamped a letter and said, nope, we can't do that, so we're going to accept it. You're blind to what your actual risk is. Risk and then exemption. So I use the word exemption. We've actually started using this in my current company. It's a term that we're using internally. It's not an industry-wide term, but I'm going to start pushing it, so I think it should be. So an extension, for those of you who are in GRC, you know that if you have issues that are going to a time limit and they're past due, and your delivery team might need a little bit longer to fix that, you give them an extension. That's normal, right? What about a risk extension? Well, think about this risk. The longer the risk is open, the more likely it is to get exfiltrated or attacked. So if you've got, let's just use vulnerabilities. Those are pretty easy ones, right? let's say we've got a critical vulnerability, and you've got an SLA within your company that says, we're gonna remediate all critical vulnerabilities in 72 hours. But you talk to your delivery team and they say, no way, that's gonna take us 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months. No way we're getting that done in 72 hours. And that may be reasonable, right? It's a lot of work sometimes. What you need to look at is, there's a couple options there. If you agree on whatever agreement team, it could be your CISO, it could be the risk owner who should be the person financially responsible for the risk if it gets actualized. If you agree to, okay, well, we're gonna take 2 months, then you need to document that as a risk. And we've started differentiating that as a risk extension for 2 reasons. One is because that's what we're really doing, is we're extending the time that the risk is available. But the other thing is that we're documenting it. Sometimes people want to just ignore that and say, okay, well, we've got an SLA, we're gonna go beyond that. And then they don't document it. Well, you don't have it in your risk profile. And I'm gonna tell you something, just because you can't remediate it within 72 hours does not mean that you shouldn't assess it. Let me talk to you about, let's see, what's the latest one? Log4j. I mean, think about it. I'm not gonna ask you to raise your hands and I'm not gonna ask you to reveal any secrets, but think about your own company. How many people in December, and January, and February got lifted off every other project they were working on to go work for Log4j? All of our companies did, right? That's a situation where we had an SLA, and maybe we weren't gonna meet it exactly to that SLA, but we didn't ignore it and say, oh, it's gonna take us 2 months to do. We moved all our resources off of that to go work on that 0 day. We have it all the time, it happens to us all the time. And so there's an assessment that says, I'm gonna accept the risk for holding on to this longer, or no, everybody stop what you're doing, go work on this and fix it. It's that urgent. So that's an extension. An exemption is things like, I don't know, you get a patch that is required for a Windows 2013, and you don't write your policies to be specific enough to technology, and you just say you're gonna patch monthly. And you got a Unix server, and it's not applicable. If you've got some tool scanning that, you might have an exemption so that it doesn't scan for that particular event. So those are the terms. I just want to make sure we're clear on those terms. Now talk about GRC and integrated GRC. You look at it as a Venn diagram and where the overlap is. So it's not G, it's not R, it's not C, it's really the integration of all of these things. And I'm not going to go through all of the items that fall onto each of these, but I want you to think about how these integrate together. Where your governance and your compliance are overlapping, that's when you've got your common and systemic issues and your common systemic problems. For those of you in GRC, go work with your delivery folks, because you can come up with common and systemic resolution, and that creates efficiency. Where you've got overlap between risk and compliance, you've got your risk exceptions and your policy exceptions. And there's a risk with all of those. When you do an exception to a policy, not an exemption, because exemption says it's not really applicable. When you do an exception to a policy, you likely have some risk that you should be logging. And then you've got your risk and your governance, and there's your risk appetite and your risk threshold, and where is that overlapping and where is that fall? So just looking at the process, and again, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but think about things where you can create some efficiency here. If you're a company that works in one regulatory environment, good, go for it. You just have to do your compliance against those regulations. But I've yet to come across any company that has just one regulatory environment. I mean, just in privacy alone in the United States, think about how many privacy regs that are coming out. We've got CCPA, and we've got the New York Shield Act, and every state is coming up with a new privacy law. And then we've got GDPR if you're international. And then if you're working in Australia, you've got the APRA laws, and it goes on and on. And then you've got PCI, and you've got ISO, and you've got HIPAA. So there's endless numbers, and you can solution and write your controls to each one of those regulations. But if you're the program running that, you're the governance to the GRC team running that, you're going to spend a huge amount of time for that. My recommendation is you have some kind of common controls. UCF is a great one, but there's otherwise you can do it yourself. It's pretty easy to do. I've had a lot of people ask about, like, where's the matrix that overlaps them? It's not really hard to do. I did it a few summers ago, literally with a spreadsheet in a couple of hours. You take your controls that you've got within your company, you overlay each of the other regulations that you need to comply with, and you see where they're common and overlapping. And those are your baseline controls. The ones that hit the most number of regulations is where the focus has to be to make sure you've got that minimum baseline. And you can add on top of that. The other thing in the process around GRC is if you're not testing regularly, you've got a massive failure. If you're relying on your third-party auditors to tell you when you're not compliant with something, you're going to fail your audits. And that's going to cost you money because you're either going to have to do a scope extension, and that costs money, or you're going to have SLA penalties with your customers because they're not happy. You probably contracted to say you'll have a SOC audit, or you'll have an ISO audit, or you'll have a PCI audit. And if you don't pass those things, you've got a problem with SLAs, it's financial penalties. So what I'm going to tell you is that the other thing you need to be doing is you've got to proactively test in compliance. What I like to tell people is, in the US we say a lawyer never goes to court asking a question they don't know the answer to. We should never go into an audit if we don't know what the answers and what our security posture is. Because if we do, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And then finally, metrics. Now, I'll talk a little bit about metrics later on in my presentation, but metrics are our friend. Metrics are how we show how we're doing things. And so we have a wealth of metrics. That's the GRC people are the gatekeepers to metrics. We have data upon data upon data. So if you're not partnering with us to get that, go knock on their doors and ask them because they've got it. So we're going to talk about partnering with your business partner, with your business owners. So the value add on partnering with business owners. So one of the things we hear is, GRC or in fact most of us right now, we're in a time of financial crunch. We don't have the money for it. Well, we may not have the money proactively, but we certainly don't have the money reactively. So if we haven't proactively in securing our environment or tested to know that we're securing our environment, then we're going to fail. And we're going to reactively have to respond, and it's going to cost us more money. Resource allocation. One of the great things that I can partner with my business leaders is when I can give them data about what the compliance structure or their risk structure profile is of their organization, I can help them to prioritize. And so I understand that when we're delivering, so I'm with a software company right now, for example, when we're trying to deliver our next version of our software, my developers and my engineers, and the companies, they're focused on the enhancements and the things that they need to do to get that new version out. But equally, we need to make sure it's secure. And so we've got to work together to figure out where the priorities of compliance and risk reduction or risk optimization fit in there. From the GRC perspective, know your stakeholders. Don't just go and write policies in a vacuum. Don't write them just to your standards or your compliance requirements or your customer compliance. You have got to partner with your business leaders because we can write all the policies we want. And I've been in a couple of companies where I joined and one or two people in the GRC team wrote all the policies. So, okay, well, did you ask for input? Well, I went and talked to Joe. He's an IAM. I figured he might know around the access control policies. Okay, but did you talk to your delivery folks, your biz tech folks, your SecOps folks? Did you talk to them? Well, no, what do they have to do with IAM? Well, they're using it. So if you write a policy that's too difficult to comply with, and here's an example of that. I had a team that wanted to write a policy that said we were going to do access reviews on every single application every single month. And this particular environment that I was in, this particular company I was in, we didn't have a tool to do that. So they were expecting our technical folks, our sysadmins, to run those reports monthly. I could barely get them to run them every 6 months. So I was going to go to them and say, you have to run this monthly. There was no regulatory requirement for that at the time. There was no contractual requirement at the time. It was just gold standard. And the folks that wanted to write that, I said, okay, great. Go talk to delivery and find out if you can do it. And the delivery folks said, no, we can't really do that. Well, we could do it, but we're going to charge you back for the extra time. Then I'm going to take somebody off of another project to go run that. So if you don't partner proactively, you are going to cost the company money. Now, I'm not saying write your policies to what the business wants to do, because we all understand that there are regulations like PCI, like GDPR, like ISO, like your SOC audits, that there are just requirements that we've got to comply with. But if you don't partner with your leadership or your business folks or your delivery folks, then you're not meeting that middle ground. So you've got to be obviously above the threshold of what's required, but you don't always have to be at gold standard. Gold standard's great, but it's not great if we're not going to be compliant and you're having an audit finding. Because again, I'm going to circle back. If you have an audit finding, if you don't understand this, let me tell you what happens with an audit finding. Again, you get SLA penalties because your contracts probably say you'll have an ICD SOC audit, you'll have a PCI audit, and you'll pass it, by the way. You'll have a Sarbanes-Oxley audit. God forbid you fail that one. That's a big one. So if you set your bar at gold standard, but you can't actually deliver to gold standard, and you don't need to go to gold standard, you're setting yourself up for failure. The other thing that I do with leadership is I do a top-down, bottom-up approach. So I don't just do a top-down, and I don't just do a bottom-up. So by top-down, I mean I create metrics. So I've got a scorecard that goes to our executive leadership every month, and it has various different KPIs and sometimes KRIs, and KRIs and sometimes KPIs, and that goes to our executive leadership every month. And guess what I found? I have found that leadership hates the color red. So when you do bar charts or pie charts or donut charts or any other chart you have, and their name or their division shows up with red, they don't like it. So use your metrics. I always stick to it. I've had some of my staff do some of the graphs, and I'm, with this company, I've only been with about 2 years, so we've been maturing some of our graphs. And the first couple of times, I delegated some of this, and so the first couple of times I had graphs done, said, can you get me the data on whatever? And my staff came back with purple and orange and pink and whatever, and I said, okay, that is so meaningless to me. I have no idea what that means. Why is one higher than the other? Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. And I got them to consistently, now I'm not saying you can't have those other colors in, but consistently my bar, I love stacked bar charts. I'm just a big fan of stacked bar charts because it shows you how you're doing in ranking compared to everybody else. What's my proportion of red? What's my proportion of amber? What's my proportion of green? And my managers and my executive leadership, they like it too because they can really quickly just look at a chart and say, okay, well, we've got way too much red. Let's fix that. So I use metrics from a top-down perspective at a very global and aggregated level. I use metrics at a bottom-up because guess what? When I go talk to the CFO or the CISO or the COO, there's an amount that they're going to drive with their staff, but I guarantee you they're not talking to the sysadmins to say, Joe, go make this your priority for the day. So I need a bottom-up approach too. And they're not going to be able to actually action it at the level of the detail I'm giving to the C-level staff. But I also create the bottom-up report, which is more detailed and aggregated, because people need to be able to action it. And so I need to work with my sysadmins, I need to work with the engineers, I need to work with the people that are hands on keyboard, my first line of defense, in a way that they can actually action it and go fix it. And we set up, sometimes if I've got a big enough problem, if I've got issues that are far behind, or I've got compliance scans that are far behind, I'll set up monthly meetings with them and go through so if you're on my top 10 list, you don't want to be on the top 10. If you're on my top 10 list, you get a meeting with me and a couple of my staff, and you can explain to me what you're doing in the next month. And if you say to me it's not a priority, I'm going to bring up that other graph that's going to your C-level, and I'm going to go talk to your C-level and say, so Joe in BizTech, he's having a problem. He has some priorities that are conflicting, and I need him to get this done. Now, I get it. You've got client expectations, you've got product expectations, that's okay. We're just gonna work together to prioritize. What I don't wanna hear is, and I heard this joke, I got that report. Yeah, today I had this client fire. Tomorrow, definitely, I'm gonna work on that tomorrow. And tomorrow, they say to me, this other client escalated, and I had to go, my boss pulled me off, and I had to go work on this other thing today. And then tomorrow becomes tomorrow, becomes tomorrow. So we've got to work together. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Just looking at my time. How are we going to do this through scale? We're going to do this through automation. If you don't have a GRC platform, and I'm not about any vendor, but if you don't have a GRC platform, you're not going to be able to scale. So if you've got SharePoints and PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets, that's fine, it's better than nothing, but I'd like you to think about getting some kind of automation on that, some kind of tool that's going to integrate it all together. Because when you're going to do that, is you're going to create some internal automation within the tool that's going to talk to itself, you can have efficiency, and have external automation. And the external automation is going to be through APIs and integration with other tools that you already have existing. So this is kind of a crazy slide. It's not all of the integration. I just wanted to show you some of the, ways, let's go back. Some of the ways you can integrate things. What I want to see is, I want, when you log an issue, I want, if that's risk acceptance, if you're going to risk accept that issue, I want you to be able to have integration within your tool. So the middle part is your GRC platform, basically. And it's any GRC platform. I want you to be able to talk, I want those to talk to each other. I don't want you to have to open an issue and then open a risk assessment and then open a risk acceptance. I don't want you to do that. And I don't want you to have the vendor risk assessment also do the same thing. If you have a risk, then it has to open an issue, then it has to open a risk in your risk assessment. I want the tool to talk to each other, and they do. Most of the good tools and most of the good platforms, they talk to each other. But they also talk externally. And so what I did about 5 or 6 years ago back at my last job, and I'm doing it now again, is we started looking at, we had a tool that was we called it infrastructure compliance, configuration and compliance, whatever you want to call it. It was basically scanning our servers for compliance with particular controls. And I had somebody, and we ran that on about 250,000 servers every single month. And we got a report, and people went out and they looked at the report and they actioned it. And then I had an internal compliance testing our controls in my GRC tool, and we asked some of the same questions. And what they would do is people would go out and they'd get an email saying, hey, do you do X, Y, Z? And they would look at that report, that compliance report for the infrastructure compliance, and they would go answer the question. So I talked, both of those teams reported to me at the time. So I talked to my two leaders on those two teams, and I said, can't we get these tools to talk to each other? Why does a person have to go pull that? Let's make them talk to each other. And so we built that. That was before I even knew what an API was. Now, wind the clock forward 5 or 10 years, and there's API connections automatically with a lot of these tools. And if they're not, what I have found is most of the vendors will partner with you to build it. I'm building it right now with a risk aggregation tool. So we've got a vulnerability aggregation. We've got a vulnerability aggregation tool. I'm not going to tell you which one. But it is pulling in the reports of all of our vulnerability management into one aggregated report. And some of those vulnerabilities, we're going to accept the risk on. Well, we're going to first do a risk assessment. But I need that all tracked in the tool, in my GRC tool, because that's my tool of record. That's my risk register. So right now we're doing swivel share. People go over, they look at the report, they put it in, they log it into the GRC tool. Guess what? I'm getting a lot of complaints. People don't have the time to do it. So what we're doing right now, I'm in the middle of building it, is we're building an API integration from our vulnerability aggregating tool into our GRC platform. It's going to open a risk and tell us that we need to do an assessment, and then we'll do the whole risk assessment process. When you can do that, I've done it with the compliance and configuration management. You can do it with vulnerability. You can do it with your pen test. I mean, you can do it basically with any of these sources of other tools that you all are running. And that's why I said to the IT folks, partner with your GRC folks. Get these connections, it's really easy. Computers are really smart. They can talk to each other. And sometimes there's some configuration you've got to do and mapping, and well, an issue isn't an issue there, it's something else in the other tool. And so you do all of that. But then the computers do it. And when you do that, you can scale. And when you can scale, you can create efficiency. You eliminate the manual efforts. You eliminate the work that all the people are running around doing. And you create a better environment with more consistent compliance and risk optimization. So, I think I'm about out of time. I'm happy to take any Q&A. I'm also happy to be around for a while, so I'm happy to take Q&A at the back. If I can leave with parting words, it's this. If you haven't automated, you can't scale, and you're going to lose efficiency. So one of our other speakers here, who happens to be my old boss, Gavin Browns, he has a presentation on risk quantification. If you haven't had a chance, DataConnectors has him speak quite frequently. But he ends his session with this, and I'm going to steal it from him. He says, from risk quantification, start with what you do know, build on what you could know, aspire to what you should know. And I'm gonna steal that a little bit and modify it. And I'm gonna say, start with what you can automate and integrate and build on it from there.
All right.